It is the longest undefended border in the world. For over a century, it has been more than just a line on a map. It's been a symbol of partnership, a seamless economic artery where goods, people, and dreams flow freely, an invisible bond worth over $2 billion a day. But in July 2025, one man's declaration threatened to erect an economic iron curtain, a move that didn't just challenge a trade relationship, but forced Canada to make a choice it never wanted to make: lead a global rebellion against its closest ally. How did the world's most successful partnership find itself on the brink of an all-out trade war? To understand how deep the fracture is, you first have to appreciate how deep the bond was. For decades, the United States and Canada weren't just neighbors, they were an integrated economic organism. Under frameworks like NAFTA and its successor, USMCA, they built one of the most intricate cross-border supply chains ever conceived. A single car part might cross the border 6 or 7 times before the finished vehicle rolls off the assembly line in Michigan or Ontario. This wasn't just trade. It was a shared industrial ecosystem, a pact of mutual prosperity built on trust and predictability. It was the envy of the world. But the cracks began to show long before 2025. The first Trump administration's sporadic tariffs on steel and aluminum in 2018 served as a wake-up call for Ottawa. The episode, though eventually resolved, planted a seed of doubt. Canadian policymakers and business leaders realized that relying so heavily on a single, increasingly unpredictable partner was a strategic vulnerability. Quietly, a pivot began. According to data from Reuters, a concerted effort to diversify trade partners was already well underway. While the U.S. remained its largest market, Canadian exports to America had already slipped from a dominant 78% in 2021 to a noticeably lower 68% by mid-2025. Ottawa was actively strengthening ties with the European Union and burgeoning Asian economies. This wasn't an act of aggression, but one of self-preservation. It was a strategic shift that meant when the next, much larger storm arrived, Canada wouldn't just be better prepared, it would be ready to fight back on its own terms. The storm hit on July 10, 2025. It wasn't a subtle shift in policy, it was a thunderclap. In a move that blindsided markets and diplomats alike, President Donald Trump announced a staggering 35% tariff on all goods imported from Canada, set to take effect in just 3 weeks. The official justification from the White House was a laundry list of grievances designed for public consumption, cracking down on the flow of illicit fentanyl, ensuring FE would create chaos, push an opponent to the brink, and then offer a last-minute deal, claiming victory after rattling the global economy. This time, however, the target wasn't just Canada. Reports quickly surfaced that the European Union and Japan had received similar back-channel warnings. Fall in line or face devastating 25 to 30% tariffs on everything from cars to steel to food. It was a global shakedown. But Trump and his advisors had made a critical miscalculation. They were dealing with a Canada that had learned from the past and was no longer willing to play the part of the compliant neighbor. The reaction from Ottawa was not one of panic, but of defiance. Within hours, Prime Minister Mark Carney stood before the world and announced that Canada would not blink. He laid out a list of immediate, symmetrical, retaliatory tariffs targeting iconic American products, the political lifeblood of key U.S. states. Agricultural staples like beef and soybeans, industrial materials like steel and aluminum. It was a direct shot across the bow. But the real masterstroke wasn't retaliation. It was coalition building. Carney didn't just look south, he looked east and west. He launched an emergency diplomatic blitz, initiating urgent calls with leaders in the EU, Japan, the United Kingdom, and Australia. His message was simple. Today it is Canada, tomorrow it will be you. We must stand together. This resonated powerfully. At an emergency G20 trade conference in Tokyo, Japan and Australia publicly condemned America's unilateralism, warning it would catastrophically destabilize global supply chains. In Brussels, Italian Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani confirmed the EU had a retaliation list worth 21 billion euros, locked and loaded. For the first time since the end of World War II, Canada, the historically steadfast ally, was actively positioning itself as the leader of a global trade alliance against the United States. Analysts called it a historic strategic turning point, born of necessity. Canada was transforming from a perceived victim into the architect of a unified global front. This new reality sent immediate shockwaves through the markets. Canada's S&P/TSX Futures Index dipped, with industrial and raw material stocks taking the hardest hit. But the real drama was in the global flight to safety. Gold and silver prices surged. The U.S. dollar strengthened against the Canadian dollar and the euro as investors dumped riskier assets. A nervous quiet fell over Wall Street. Then came the ultimatum. On July 15th, Canada delivered its final public message to the White House, setting a hard deadline of July 21st. The terms were unambiguous. If the 35% tariff was not rescinded by that date, Canada would unleash a three-pronged response. First, its retaliatory tariffs would automatically take effect. Second, and more strategically painful, it would begin restricting U.S. corporate access to Canada's vast reserves of critical minerals like lithium and uranium, the building blocks of the future green economy. And third, it would fast-track bilateral trade agreements with the EU and Japan, deliberately designing a new North Atlantic clean energy supply chain that explicitly cut the United States out. It was no longer a negotiation. It was a public ultimatum, a high-stakes game of chicken played on the world stage. Trump was cornered. Either suffer the humiliation of backing down, proving the taco theory correct, or plunge North America into a full-blown economic war. The clock was ticking. But this isn't a story about politicians and stock tickers. It's a story about people and livelihoods on both sides of that once invisible line. Consider the case of an auto parts manufacturer in Windsor, Ontario, a city whose very identity is intertwined with the American auto industry across the river. For these businesses, the open border is their business model. A steering component might arrive from Ohio, receive electronic integration in Ontario, and be shipped back to a plant in Michigan for final assembly, all within a single 24-hour cycle. The 35% tariff shatters this delicate dance. It makes their highly specialized products instantly uncompetitive. The day after the announcement, major American clients put all future orders on hold, a devastating blow reflected in the dip of Canada's Industrial Stock Index. For the hundreds of workers at just one of these plants, this isn't an abstract economic headline. It's a potential pink slip. It's the looming threat to mortgages, car payments, and the stability of an entire community built on the promise of seamless trade. The future, once as predictable as the next shift, is now dangerously uncertain. Just a few hundred miles away, in Buffalo, New York, that pain is mirrored. This isn't a one-way street. Take the example of America's construction industry. Countless home builders rely on a steady, affordable supply of two key materials from across the border: Canadian softwood lumber for framing houses and steel for structural support. Following the tariff announcement, their suppliers immediately warned of projected price hikes of 30 to 40%. For a third-generation home builder with contracts to build a dozen new homes, the math becomes impossible. They face a stark choice: absorb catastrophic losses or go back to American families and tell them the price of their dream home just became a nightmare. It's the exact scenario American business groups had warned about. The ultimate cost of this trade dispute won't be paid by politicians in Ottawa, but by American consumers and small businesses. This is why investors flock to the perceived safety of gold, betting against a quick resolution. For many on the ground, it feels like a self-inflicted wound, where the intended target is a foreign government, but the casualties are local. And so, North America stands at a crossroads it never anticipated. A relationship forged in history and shared prosperity is now defined by an ultimatum, with global consequences hanging in the balance. Canada has discovered a new assertive role on the world stage, while the United States faces the economic blowback of its own aggressive tactics. The path of mutual reliance has been fractured, replaced by a high-stakes confrontation where the cost of losing is catastrophic for both sides. The deadline is here, and the continent holds its breath. In the race to define the future, will North America win together, or will both sides lose trying to go it alone? Are you American or Canadian? Share your story and your perspective in the comments below.